Hello and welcome back to Regenesis Sanctuary, where I build for endangered animals in Planet Zoo while I tell you some facts about the real-life animals. Last time I finished off the Asia temperate area of the zoo, and now we are returning to the entrance area with the African penguins. When we made this habitat, I left the back side of it empty, promising to have something planned for it in the future. And it's finally time to start building on that. I want to make a veterinary research center for this location that is going to be a central focal point of this zoo. Because this zoo mainly focuses on conservation, I think it just makes sense to highlight it. Not only will this be a good workplace for the staff, it'll also be accessible to the guests who can take a look at what it takes to help these animals thrive. The top floor of this facility will have some staff buildings, including a transformer and a water filter, a staff room, a keeper hut, and of course a research center. At this point I first put in a veterinary center by mistake, but I'll fix that later and add in a research center. Once the infrastructure of the building was done, it's time to add in some walls and some flooring to create the general layout of the building. For the front of the building overlooking the African penguin habitat, I want some large windows so the staff can look into the habitat from here. This building is mainly inspired by a lecture I had a couple of months ago. One of the people speaking at this lecture was a veterinarian from Artis Zoo in the Netherlands, who actually arranges the conservation program of African penguins in the entirety of Europe. There are quite a bunch of zoos in Europe who have African penguins, and he keeps track of all of them in a program that keeps track of the genetics. This is very important so they can have a diverse gene pool and keep the population as healthy as possible. I am placing a lot of windows in the bottom floor of this building so that guests can look inside from the outside and see what's going on in the research facility. There is also an opportunity for them to enter and look through the large windows inside to get an even closer look. For the walls of this building, I made one segment, and when I was happy with that, I copied it all around the circular side of the building. African penguins have a set partner for their entire life, and they use this genetic program to keep track of which pairs should be having children to add to the gene pool. However, African penguins are not that monogamous either, so sometimes they are not entirely sure who is the parent of which egg. In captivity, eggs are usually taken from the adult penguins and incubated artificially. They are usually replaced by fake eggs so that the penguins don't miss them. The chicks are kept in the same enclosure as the adults, but if they have to move to a different zoo, this is usually done when they're about 4 months of age. At this age, the wild penguins would also leave the nest and spend several months out on sea before returning back to shore. When they would return back to shore, sometimes they join the same group of penguins, but other times they might join a different one. So zookeepers use this natural timing to change the location of the young penguins, without causing too much stress on them. For the roof of it, I then made some slight adjustments to make it all make sense a little bit, because when I had just placed everything, it was just a big mess of wooden beams, so I had to clean that up a little. Then I created a balcony outside of the top floor, so that the staff can go outside and take a break while looking out over the penguins. Time to clean up the inside a little bit. First of all, we need some doors so that the staff can actually get inside the rest of the building without having to walk through glass. They will walk through the glass, it just looks weird. Then I am creating these large lab tables for the staff to work at. This will be the area where they incubate the eggs with the African penguins. Like I mentioned before, the offspring of the African penguins is exchanged between zoos to keep a healthy gene pool. But African penguins aren't usually released into the wild from captivity. There are still some wild African penguins and they live in South Africa and Namibia. However, unfortunately there are less and less wild African penguins. They have actually reached the IUCN status of critically endangered since last year of 2024. Another speaker at this lecture was a veterinarian who actually works to try and increase the population of African penguins in the wild. He works for an organization called SANCOP, and they work with African penguins to give them the best chance of survival. One of the most remarkable things that he told us that they do is that they take small chicks and eggs from the colony if they have been abandoned by the parents. They will then raise these chicks to be old enough to be set out in the wild again, giving them a better chance of survival. When they are abandoned by the parents, they would usually not survive, but by raising them, it increases the overall number of African penguins that are in the population. Besides this project, they also help rescue the animals in case of disaster, for example oil spills. And they help other species as well, mostly different seabirds around the same area. I will actually leave a link to their website in the description in case you want to read more about them. For the inside of this workspace, I'm stealing some of the furniture that I made for the office for the entrance building, but I'm also creating some new ones. Like this little stool over here that I'll copy over a bunch of times around the area, so that the staff has something to sit on while working. I'm also adding some computers to the area for the necessary administration, and of course some decoration on the empty walls. Then I am creating an egg incubator using some glass pieces, a metal frame, and some of the gutter pieces to simulate rails on which the eggs can lie. I'm also adding some LED lighting to simulate some infrared heating. Of course, adding in some eggs. And then I copied this one over a couple of times around. At this point I did decide I wanted to give the visitors an actual reason to come into this building, so I decided to add some exhibit animals. The Goliath frog and the Mexican red-kneed tarantula. Because these exhibits are very large, I wanted to make it look like there were multiple smaller ones. Usually zoos would have the male and female animals of these type of terrarium species separately, so that they cannot breed by accident. So I created a separation that separated them out, and I imagined that the males and females are separated in this exhibit. However, in Planet Zoo we will have them together in one exhibit because we want them to be breeding and creating offspring. I also put in a little bit of a lower ceiling and some extra lights. Because the walls of these exhibits were looking very empty now, I added some ivy just to spruce it up a little bit. And then I just cleaned up some edges with some more wood beams and added some education, of course. On the other side of this room, I also added some general conservation education, although I'm not sure if this really attracts the guests. This room is actually the most suitable room to actively ask customers for money, which you see a lot in zoos. These types of donations really help to take as good care of the animals as possible. So I decided to put a donation bin without any decoration around it, just in the middle of the room. Finally, on the other side of this lab, I decided that this was for the terrarium animals, which is why I'm making this smaller terrarium that in Planet Zoo can't have any actual animals in there, but in real life this would be used to house any type of terrarium animal. I'm using the same type of glass and metal frame for the edges of this terrarium as I did for the egg incubator. Then I filled the bottom of it with some mulch and added a bunch of plants. I think putting this light in really finishes it off, and then I copied a bunch of them around on these tables on this side of the lab. For some final detail, I just added around some crates with some vegetables and stuff, some barrels that might contain food or something, and some cardboard boxes that are actually used relatively often to transport animals. And of course, to be able to work in such an environment, we do need plenty of lights. Then onto the top floor. I first had a couple of edges to clean up, because this is a circular building and the square pieces don't exactly line up, so I used these concrete panels to fix that up. Now there was still a lot of space left over, so I decided to divide it up into 3 rooms. And then I stole some more of the furniture from the original office building. I decided that the 2 rooms to the side could just be regular office spaces where people could work, and the middle large room overlooking the part of the zoo that is not nearly finished yet can be a nice conference room with a nice view. I don't think these rooms need to be perfect because no one's actually gonna come here, but I still wanted it to look nice if you happen to look through the window. Then, of course, we needed a sign to make sure everyone knows what's inside of this building, so I placed some wooden panels as a backing on these rustic walls and used the same colors of letters that I used for the entrance building. It's pretty simple, but I do still like the way this looks. I also wanted people to be able to see what this building was from the other side, so I made a modified version of the sign for the front of the building. Or I guess the back of the building. It's really not that clear which side is the front or back at this point. Cleaning up some final edges and adding some benches and bins around the side, and our research center is finally finished. For a couple of final touches around this area, I added some food trucks in front of the souvenir shop, because it is quite a walk for the people to go without food and drinks. And this is the final building. The guests can enjoy some nice exhibit animals, and the staff have a nice area in which they can work on the conservation of a bunch of species, namely the African penguin and some terrarium animals. It's the perfect place to educate the guests on how these things go. And then upstairs there's some regular workspaces with an amazing view on the entrance building and the African penguin habitat. That was it for today. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, make sure to join me next time when we're gonna start on a brand new area of the zoo, an Asian jungle area. I am excited to get started on that, and I hope you are too. But until then, have a nice day. Bye!